Good afternoon, everyone. This is the June 13, 2025 meeting of the Legislative Study Commission for the Environmental and Health Effects of Perfluorinated alkylated substances. We presently do not have a quorum, so we will skip over the first item of our agenda, which is minutes of our prior meeting. And in terms of updates on commission membership, we are still awaiting formal Senate confirmation of Ray Brislin, Senate President confirmation. I think there's still a Litchfield vacancy. Rich Lascelles joins us by phone, and just a reminder to speak up because I can't tell if you have a question, so don't hesitate to interrupt. And before we get started, I just want to say a thank you to Michelle Roberge, who is leaving DHHS for DES, so not moving far. But Michelle has filled in twice now when Dr. Bush left and then when Leanne Atwell left. So our thanks to Michelle. So first item on our agenda, I'm very pleased to have Tracy Wood here with us to give us some information about wastewater and where that stands in terms of PFAS in the state. I think you're muted.
Hi everyone, happy to be here. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Don't use GoToWebinar too much. So Amy, if you're still there or someone can help me with how to share my screen. Oh, show my screen.
Tracy, would you mind just letting us know your title at DES, like for the minutes?
Sure. Can you see my slides right now?
I see the slide, yeah.
Okay. And you see,
we see
my
presenter
notes?
mode. Yeah, we see your notes, Tracy, if you want to switch your display.
How do I do that?
Go up to the top, see where it says display settings.
Yeah.
And
Swap
just
presenter and okay.
You
Now you see, okay. All right, great. All right, so there you have my name and title. So I am Tracy Wood. I am the administrator of the Wastewater Engineering Bureau here at DES. I've been in this position for about 10 years now, and I've worked at DES for 17 years. Prior to that, I was in private consulting. So I'm happy to be here to provide an update on PFAS and biosolids and what actions New Hampshire DES is taking to address PFAS and biosolids. But in order to understand the inputs to biosolids, I want to step back and first talk about the overarching term residuals and what is meant by residuals. We have within my bureau the residuals management section, but we have no formal definition of residuals or residuals management in our governing statute 485A, water pollution and waste disposal, or our governing rules ENV WQ 800, sludge management, and we also administer the rules ENV WQ 1600, septage management. So when you think about residuals, as an adjective, residual means remaining after the greater part or quantity is gone. So in the world of wastewater, we consider that greater part or quantity the liquid effluent, and the remaining part or quantity the solid stream or sludge. So where does sludge come from? Municipal wastewater treatment plants have many inputs that may include domestic, commercial, industrial, as well as pumped septage, leachate, etc. The wastewater is treated, and we have the liquid stream, effluent, and the solid stream, the sludge. The pumped septage I mentioned is the solids that settle in a septic tank that need to be pumped every 3 to 5 years, depending on the size of the system and its use. These solids are mostly sent to a wastewater treatment plant for treatment, and they're put in at the headworks of the wastewater treatment plant. The liquid stream from a septic tank or known as gray water is discharged to a leach field. Drinking water treatment plants also generate sludge. This sludge may be discharged direct to a wastewater collection system, or the drinking water treatment plant may have their own individual discharge permit. Important to note that liquid effluent is regulated based on where it is discharged. Discharge to a surface water is regulated by NIPD's permits through my bureau. Discharge to groundwater is regulated by groundwater discharge permits through our Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau, and septic systems are regulated by our Subsurface Systems Bureau. In fact, some facilities may even be regulated by multiple programs. So the Wastewater Engineering Bureau is where I reside, and our mission is to support planning, design, construction, and operation of clean water infrastructure for the protection of public health and the environment. I will say the mission is not getting easier as the years progress, but more difficult. I don't want to date myself, but when I graduated from Northeastern University in 1993, municipal wastewater treatment was concerned with biochemical oxygen demand, total suspended solids, and bacteria. The industry addressed those parameters, right? We had oxygen depleted rivers, we had fish kills, we had solids going into rivers and filling them. We've accomplished that. But as we continue to learn more about how we humans impact the environment, we are concerned with nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, right, our cyanoblooms, and metals. And going even further, we are most recently needing to address emerging contaminants such as PFAS. It is my opinion the Wastewater Engineering Bureau is uniquely structured to assist in accomplishing the mission. We have 6 sections which fall into 2 categories, infrastructure and operations. In our infrastructure sections, we have planning and design, which includes the issuance of sewer connection permits. We have a construction management group that oversees federal and state funded projects. And we have a grants management section that administers clean water SRF and our state aid grant programs. This includes the recent Clean Water SRF EC monies, or emerging contaminants monies, from the bill funding. As part of operations, we have our operations group, which provides technical assistance to New Hampshire's wastewater treatment plants and operators. We have permits and compliance. This section works with EPA Region 1 to issue NIPD's permits, as New Hampshire is not delegated, but ensures permits meet water quality standards. And our residuals management section that licenses septic and sludge haulers and administers our SQC program. So for today on the agenda, we're going to start with what's going on federally. I'll give a brief summary of EPA's draft biosolids risk assessment for PFOA and PFAS, our efforts here at DES. I'm going to talk about the sludge quality certificate program, the PFAS modeling and screening standard development effort that we have, talk about what's happening with PFAS and NIPD's permits, and I'll talk about what we're utilizing the Clean Water SRF bill or IIJA emerging contaminants funds. So EPA's draft biosolids risk assessment was released on January 14th of this year. The bullets that I have here are direct from a presentation given by EPA to states prior to its release. So what their summary is there are PFAS risks associated with all biosolids disposal options, land application, incineration, and landfilling. But this assessment focused mostly on land application. Wastewater treatment facilities do not intentionally use or add PFAS. They receive it. They are proud stewards of our environment. They acknowledge limited options to dispose of sewage sludge. The risk assessment did not study risks to the general public. Rather, it was limited to the risks to a farm family who gets all of their food and drink from the farm on which the biosolids were applied and continue to be applied. They assessed 3 scenarios. The risk assessment did confirm risk from biosolids land application to the farm families in the study, and it noted that EPA must take further action. The risk assessment does not set any limits and does not compel action. It is non-regulatory, non-enforceable. They noted that the risks associated with incineration and landfilling require further data to study. The original 60-day comment period ended in March. It's currently extended to August 14th, and EPA is requesting comments on the scientific components of the study, not on whether biosolids should be land applied or not. The general consensus of the water sector is that the study is not realistic and not very helpful. I'd like to reiterate that the assessment or EPA did note that wastewater treatment facilities do not intentionally use or add PFAS. They receive it. I highlighted the word biosolids here, and I want to make sure we all understand how the terms are defined in our world. As used here, they really should have said, according to our definitions, they should have said sludge and not biosolids. Because when you generate sludge, there are various disposal options for sludge, which include land application of biosolids, a subset of sludge, incineration, and landfilling. So I've just pulled up some of our definitions from RSA 485A2. And sludge means the solid or semi-solid material produced by water and wastewater treatment processes. I italicized excluding domestic septage. Provided, however, sludge, which is disposed of at a solid waste facilities permitted by the department, shall be considered solid waste and regulated under RSA 149M. Now, I italicized domestic septage here, and the definition of septage is below, because it does include domestic septage, right? Because septic systems do not exist without wastewater treatment plants or a place to pump our septic tanks and have a place for that to go to. And in New Hampshire, we really want that to go to a wastewater treatment plant for proper treatment. So the sludge that's generated from a municipal wastewater treatment plant often does include septage inputs. Biosolids here, I gave the definition for meats.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you a moment?
You certainly can.
Okay, this is Representative Rich Lascelles. I understand if you pump out a septic tank, you got the solids, and then that's transferred to a wastewater treatment plant. But we all know that whenever there's solids in septic tanks, there's bacteria, natural bacteria, that eats away at that. Now, if you had a perfectly running septic tank, would there be any solid sludge that would be transferred to a septic, a water treatment plant?
Yes, it absolutely would. There are bacteria that do maybe eat some of the solids, we'll call it, like, for food, but then they also discharge waste themselves. So every septic tank in the state needs to be pumped on a regular basis every 3 to 5 years. I don't want to get off topic, but we have lagoon wastewater treatment plants that are lagoon facilities. And way back when, with the Clean Water Act, people thought, oh, well, the sludge that's, generated or sent to the lagoons will eventually just disappear. The bacteria will eat it. And that's not the case. We have wastewater treatment plants right now that have neglected removing sludge from their lagoons, and they're not operating as originally designed, and they just haven't kept up with regular removing sludge. So they're dealing with these really, really big projects having to remove sludge that's been accumulating for far too long. So any other questions before I?
No, thank you very much.
Sure. So biosolids is that subset of sludge, and basically biosolids has to meet our standards for beneficial reuse that are included in ENVWQ 800. So we have rules for the use of biosolids. And then I did provide the definitions of sewage and wastewater treatment facilities just for everyone's information, because those are used in the definition of biosolids. So, what have we been doing in New Hampshire? Well, PFAS is impacting wastewater treatment systems in New Hampshire through its ubiquity, and unknown use in industrial processes and household products that discharge to municipal wastewater treatment plants. Mostly via collection systems, but also, as I mentioned, septic receiving. The PFAS impact can pass through the wastewater treatment plant into the effluent discharged and the sludge generated from the treatment processes. These impacts have raised concerns for land application of biosolids, not only in New Hampshire, but in New England and across the US. I'd like to go back and reiterate the statement: wastewater treatment plants do not intentionally use or add PFAS. They receive it. The Wastewater Engineering Bureau has focused and will continue to focus on source identification and reduction elimination, while tangentially developing a screening standard for biosolids. Since 2017, we have been actively investigating the impacts PFAS has on the SQC program. In 2017, we did effluent sampling at the majority of New Hampshire's wastewater treatment plants. In the spring of 2019, we implemented a monitoring requirement for PFAS in each sludge quality certificate. The results are summarized in our annual statute-mandated sludge and biosolids testing report, which is submitted to the legislature. We solicited for communities to participate in a collection system sampling program to strategically look in their collection systems to identify potential hotspots of PFAS, and then work to identify actual source and engage the source to eliminate their PFAS contribution. We engaged stakeholders to form the Northeast Biosolids Improvement Program that generated handouts for distribution about how to improve the quality of biosolids from the impacts of PFAS. In 2019, we also began planning and developing a soil and sludge PFAS leaching study to be contracted and conducted by the USGS. This study was completed in 2023. Through this 3-phase study, we have been able to obtain information on the background concentrations of PFAS in New Hampshire soils, establish new partitioning coefficients for PFAS in soil and sludge, and collect field data to support information generated from the use of these parameters within a soil or sludge modeling program. Most recently, we have entered into contract with Verdantis to provide professional engineering and technical support for the development of a PFAS sludge model based on leaching potential in soils from biosolids land application, and for development of a recommended screening standard to be implemented as part of our SQC program. This value will at some point be incorporated into our rules ENVWQ 800. Now, these rules are set to expire January 1st of 2026. The work that we're doing right now with Verdantis will not be complete probably until a year from now. So we are not going to be able in this round of rule updates to incorporate this standard that we're developing. So for this first round, we're just going to do housekeeping on the rules, and we're going to implement electronic forms. In the next round, so once we finish rulemaking to meet our 10-year review, to meet the expiration, we will probably this time next year have to enter into rulemaking again to implement the screening standard. We also do ongoing training for wastewater operators and engineers on how to establish a PFAS sampling and analysis plan. So the sludge quality certificate, PFAS modeling and screening standard development. So our contractor is Verdantis. The current cost of this contract is $300,000. The contract was approved at GNC on March 12th. We had our kickoff meeting on April 16th. The duration of the contract is about a year. We're expecting a final report in June 2026. We have the task listed here, which you can read. We're expecting, again, that final report a year from now. And then something else that we've done is my bureau has on-call engineering services contracts, and we are engaging Arcadis, who is a national firm, to do a technical peer review of Verdantis's work. So Arcadis will be involved through every step of this project as a check. Because we need, obviously this is going to be highly scrutinized, the public is going to be looking at this, so we want to make sure that every move we make and every step we take is looked at not just by one firm, but by another firm as well. I did put in here the definitions of beneficial use and what quality certified sludge means. So obviously beneficial use, you want to take the properties that are in the sludge, which can have benefits, right? There's not nitrogen, there's phosphorus, there's micronutrients in sludge that can be good for farming, right? That was the idea when this program was started in the late 90s, that this was a good thing. So you want to take the good things that are in sludge and beneficially reuse them. Quality certified sludge means a sludge or a mixture of sludge that has received sludge quality certification pursuant to EMV WQ 809, or is a mixture of sludge for which each constituent sludge has received sludge quality certification. So it's either the individual parts together have received an SQC. It contains nutrients or organic material or both that can be used to improve cropland or forested land, or can be used for reclamation. I'm going to take a switch here and talk about PFAS and NIPDES permits. As stated earlier, EPA Region 1 is the permitting authority for wastewater treatment plants that discharge through a point source, like a pipe, to a surface water. Most of New Hampshire's municipal wastewater treatment plants are regulated by a NIPDES permit. Starting with the 2021 Small Wastewater Treatment Facility General Permit, which was issued in September of 2021 and an effective date of December of 2021, which included about 40 wastewater treatment facilities, included PFAS monitoring requirements. This was in direct response to the New Hampshire legislature enacting legislation on July 23rd, 2020, establishing maximum contaminant levels, or MCLs, and ambient groundwater quality standards, AGQS, for 4 PFAS compounds in state statute. Since that time, all NIPDES permits issued to wastewater treatment facilities have included PFAS monitoring requirements. This includes not only the 40 facilities I mentioned in the small wastewater treatment facility general permit, but 14 individual permits as well. And then on the horizon, we have the draft New Hampshire medium wastewater treatment facility general permit, which is going to cover 21 facilities. The public comment period ended in February. We just received a package from EPA that we need to review, and it's hopeful that this permit will get finalized this summer. But now, remember, I said that small wastewater treatment facility general permit was issued back in 2021. What language was included in the permit was that sampling was to begin the first full calendar quarter, beginning 6 months after EPA notifies permittees that appropriate multi-lab validated test methods are made available by EPA to the public. Well, when did that happen? 3 years later, after the first permit was issued with PFAS monitoring requirements, EPA released its final method. Following that, on February 14th, EPA Region 1 issued a letter to permittees stating PFAS monitoring requirements was to begin the 4th calendar quarter of 2024, and that's the October to December 2024 period. We received the first round of results January 15th, 2025. Our next step with that is we plan to utilize our on-call engineering services contract to summarize the data collected and derive meaning from it. So what kind of monitoring is in NPDES permit? So they have to monitor the influent and effluent twice a year. The sludge varies from once per quarter to 2 times per year, or to 1 event per permit cycle per each cell if it's a lagoon facility. Certain industrial users that are on my next slide have to test once per year, and they have to do it for New Hampshire's 4 regulated compounds, but actually the current PFAS, I think they're doing 40. I think when they actually do the analysis, it'll include 40 PFAS compounds. So the types of industrial discharges that they're going to be looking at in NPDES permits, ranges here, and then not only the ones that are listed here, but they also have to look if there are any other known or expected sources of PFAS, they need to include those as well. I will say, as summarized by EPA, the purpose of this monitoring and reporting requirement is to better understand potential discharges of PFAS from NPDES permitted facilities and to inform future permitting decisions, including the potential development of water quality-based effluent limits on a facility-specific basis. So I talked a little bit about the monies that we have. So my bureau oversees the Clean Water SRF program. And with the bill funding, or now it's Infrastructure and Investments Jobs Act, IIJA, from 2022 to 2026, we received an infusion of funds. We have our base allotment, we got our supplemental allotment, and then this very specific allotment called the Emerging Contaminants Funds. These funds could be used to look at pharmaceuticals, microplastics, PFAS. With the limited funds that we were receiving, we decided to focus on PFAS. The monies that we were getting, we got $935,000 in 2022, and then we get $2.125 million each fiscal year from 23 to 26. Although right now we're not sure what's happening on the federal level and if we will actually receive funds in 26. These particular funds are supposed to be 100% 100% subsidy. In our world here, we do not give out grants, we give out loans with 100% forgiveness. What did we want to do? So we were thinking, what do we want to focus on here? And one of the things that we have been hearing is that landfill leachate is really impacting our wastewater treatment plants. So we wanted to utilize these funds to kind of break the cycle, right? We have communities that have a municipal landfill, they have a municipal wastewater treatment plant, they're sending their leachate to their municipal wastewater treatment plant, their treatment plant is generating sludge, that sludge may be going back to that landfill. And so how do we break this cycle of PFAS that may be happening? So we wanted to look at have communities that have this situation apply for funds to look at how they can break that cycle. Another project type was projects that evaluate and demonstrate regional or statewide solutions to eliminate PFAS and wastewater residuals. And then also another project type is basically any project that could protect groundwater and surface water. I have a couple of projects here that applied for the EC funds. So in our 2022 solicitation, we had one project come in, North Conway Water Precinct. The situation that I described, Conway accepts North Conway Water Precinct's publicly owned treatment works sludge. North Conway Water Precinct in return accepts Conway's landfill leachate. This relationship that they have, they say it saves an estimated $1 million per year in combined sludge leachate disposal costs are avoided. So North Conway Water Precinct at one point had a NIPD's permit, but then at one point they shifted to a groundwater discharge permit. They utilized rapid infiltration basins to put their treated effluent into the ground. So in doing so, because they have a groundwater discharge permit, and the groundwater program has a standard in AGQS, North Conway Water Precinct has to meet that AGQS prior to discharging to groundwater. So North Conway Water Precinct determined, because they participated in our collection system sampling, that the majority of the PFAS loading at their POTW actually comes from Conway's landfill leachate, which could come from the sludge from the North Conway wastewater treatment plant. So this is a really good project that we're really excited about. So what's the project status? They've done their initial sampling. They're in the process of selecting treatment technology, 1 for separation and 2 for destruction, and then they're going to be doing some piloting. In 2023, we received 1 application for these funds, and that was from the City of Lebanon. Lebanon's landfill leachate is discharged to their POTW. They estimated that 30% of the PFAS loading was from the leachate. Where are they right now? They've collected samples. Their next step is to provide a summary. Then they're going to go on to piloting technologies as well. In 2024, we received 4 pre-applications for projects. In Nashua, we had the 4 Hills PFAS and leachate removal and destruction pilot test project. That project involves conducting a pilot test to evaluate treatment technology to remove PFAS from the 4 Hills landfill leachate discharged to Nashua's wastewater treatment plant. The Winnipesaukee River Basin Program, or WRBP, their proposed project is to be used for PFAS concentration and destruction technologies. They're calling it Evaluation Phase 1. It involves the evaluation of and demonstration of 1 or more alternatives for concentration and or destruction of PFAS chemicals in wastewater sludge, landfill leachate, and or centrate. As the project has been developing, they're going to probably be focusing more on centrate, which is internal to the wastewater treatment plant processes, and kind of break that internal cycle within the wastewater treatment plant. Portsmouth, they have their sludge minimization and PFAS destruction pilot project, which proposes a multi-phase study to evaluate a sustainable, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly biosolids management strategy for the city, including potential regional approaches. Then Coakley Landfill Group, their project, Landfill Surface Water and Groundwater Treatment Emerging Contaminants Pilot Project, is to investigate treatment options to reduce or remove PFAS in the surface water and groundwater migrating from the site. In this current year's solicitation, we actually did not receive any pre-applications, and we're deciding what we want to do moving forward. We have 6 really good projects, that are going to be working towards piloting. They may have an infrastructure project to move forward with. So we actually may not do another round of solicitation this year. We may just wait to see how these projects progress and hopefully help them with funding for the infrastructure piece of the project. So other considerations to just addressing emerging contaminants and PFAS in particular is, as we come up with new systems and these innovative alternative technologies, what level of training is going to be needed to operate these treatment systems? You know, we have to consider air pollution, and so we're working with the air division for piloting, like what requirements are they going to have for our communities and the pilot testing that they want to perform, and then even after that, if they're going to implement a full-scale project, what requirements will the air division require? So I just want to quickly mention on septage management, because as I said, like most of the solids that are pumped from our septic tanks go to wastewater treatment plants. But we also had in ENVWQ 1600, it was allowed to, we call them septage facilities. And as we were learning about these septage facilities, that there aren't probably less than a dozen, is they weren't constructed. They were just like these dug holes in the ground, and you know, my community, we're just going to pump these septic solids, and we're going to bring them over to this septic facility. We're just going to dump them in this hole we dug in the ground, and without any real controls in place. So we're really concerned about what can happen with these places, right? Because they're only supposed to take in domestic septage, but what we've learned is that some of these facilities actually took in septage that wasn't all domestic, and we're seeing some issues at these sites, especially from those facilities that didn't adhere to the rules and took in septage that was non-domestic. So we're working towards sunsetting these septage facilities. So when we recently readopted these rules in April of last year, we reduced the expiration date of a permit from 10 years after issuance to 5 years after issuance. And then we added a requirement that a facility must submit a closure plan no later than 1 year after the permit issuance or renewal, and implement the approved closure plan no later than the date of the permit expiration. The facilities that are impacted by this have been very receptive and are working with us for the most part to work towards closing these septage facilities. The goal is to get all pumped septage to a wastewater treatment plant. I just wanted to quickly have a slide here on domestic septage. Sorry, I had a spelling error there. Domestic septage. This is something the Drinking Water Groundwater Bureau is doing, and they're looking at, are there PFAS in domestic septage? They're doing some monthly sampling of residential septic tank effluent, and what we're finding is, yes, there is PFAS in domestic septage. So individual homes, we're seeing PFAS. What could it be from? Laundering, carpet floor cleaning, showering, dishwashing. It could be in shampoo. And I will say, as we learn more, one of the other things that we're doing is, I believe we're sampling or have tested 50 consumer products that enter our waste stream. So we went and selected 50 random products off the shelves, and we had those tested. And there was some alarming finds, but we're not publishing anything right now. They're just verifying the data. But even in a shampoo, you can have PFAS, and the person manufacturing the shampoo may not even know it. They could be using some surfactant that they bought from another country, and they don't even know, or it wasn't disclosed that there was PFAS in it. So We continue to investigate, we continue to learn. And then in this slide here, someone said this to me the other day, and I was like, this is a really good statement. We are not going to test or treat our way out of this. We need to stop this from getting into our systems. And that really has been our goal all along in my bureau, is whatever we do, let's see what's coming into our systems. I love the monitoring and NIPD's permits. Like, let's monitor our industries. A lot of times people or industries, they don't even know that they're contributing PFAS. And we have found too that once we find an industry and we tell them that, like, you are contributing PFAS to the wastewater treatment plant in the system, you know, we need you to look at this. They're very receptive about addressing the issue and moving forward and finding alternatives. That ends my formal presentation, so I'm open to questions.
Okay. Thank you, Tracy. I was at the Drinking Water Source Protection Conference yesterday and was very interested about the domestic septic. I'm echoing, so I'm going to stop talking. Question?
Mhm.
All right, I'm going to unmute myself, try not to echo. I understand Tanya Donnelly is trying to get in, and Kimberly Queenan, welcome. We got you in. I have a number of questions from Wendy Thomas. Let's take questions from those of you I can see. First, if you have them. Tanya. Wonderful. We now have four. So anyway, questions, Tracy. Or comments. Rosemary.
Yes, Tracy, thank you very much for the presentation. Regarding the pilot studies that are going on, are you seeing any opportunities for synergy between the different programs? For example, if there's a wastewater treatment plant that's considering more of an in-process treatment, are there opportunities for economies of scale with sharing that with other plants? I mean, I'd hate to see that, you know, we look at these pilot programs, they're effective, each person does their own thing, when we could actually be much more efficient on a statewide level, making sure that's leveraged to each plant.
That's a great comment, especially because we have limited funds. And so what we have found is these monies have been available since 2022, and here we are 2025. And our first recipient, North Conway Water Precinct, you know, here we are, and they're just getting started, right? And Lebanon was the next year, and they're really just getting started. And now we have 4 additional projects. So our plan is to, now that everyone, at least the 2 are starting to move forward, Lebanon and North Conway, and the other 4, they have to have loan applications in before June 30th, and then they'll, you know, work more towards getting started on their projects, but is to bring them all together and to have them come together as a group and talk about their projects and just see that, like, where synergies where we can get some synergies going. And I was an advocate for WRBP, which is our state facility, to have a project and do something looking like, what could we do looking at this at statewide level. So we are trying to do that on a limited basis where we can.
Because as a follow-up, my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that wastewater treatment systems, particularly tertiary systems, they pretty much have the same process. So if one plant has shown that between different, you know, process steps, they have a project that's shown to have a benefit, I can't imagine why that wouldn't be able to be reproduced or applied at another plant. I mean, is there that much difference between wastewater treatment plants? I mean, I understand volume would be different. Maybe the type of effluent coming in might be characterized differently. But if there's a successful PFAS treatment step that can be incorporated, I'd have to think that that could be reproduced for all tertiary plants.
I would say yes, yes. We have a wide variety of plants in New Hampshire, and we don't have a lot of tertiary plants.
Oh,
We have a
okay.
lot of secondary plants. We do not have a lot of tertiary plants. So as we bring more tertiary plants online, that is definitely a possibility. Each permit is individualized to the community, and they're receiving water. So not every permit is necessarily going to have metals limits in it, or the same metals limits. And not every permit is necessarily going to have nutrient limits in it. It's very individualized to the plant itself and where they're discharging to, right? Because some rivers that we discharge to have a very low dilution factor, and some have a very high dilution factor, right? It's from discharging into like the Merrimack River, the Connecticut River, to then the Lamprey River, right? It's a wide variety. So the permit limits are individual, and so that's what makes them unique. And so they're different, and they don't all have the same treatment processes. We still have quite a few lagoon facilities in the state, and you can't go from a lagoon facility to a tertiary treatment process. You're going to have additional steps in there, just because the quality of the effluent that they put out is not as consistent as a mechanical secondary treatment plant. But I like that, and I'm noting that down to like review all the tertiary plants in New Hampshire and see if we can get them to do like what they're saying, how their sampling results are coming out different than the other plants for PFAS,
Yeah,
now that it's included in the permits.
yeah, because I think it would be a priority, if possible, to have projects that are able to be replicated.
Yes.
Because just if, there's some kind of equipment or machinery that is necessary, it's much easier to supply spare parts or whatever, than everybody having their own thing. And it's really difficult to leverage resources between plant to plant, even though they're owned by a municipality. I'd like to see them working more together to reduce their fixed costs. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Also, maybe on not related to PFAS, but maybe offline we can talk about the state's, if it's a state priority to get some of these secondary plants on a tertiary system, just to reduce the amount of organics going into surface water. Because that's going to consume oxygen, right? It's going to take oxygen away from the river, from the water source. And I think particularly as we've seen a warming of surface waters throughout the state and throughout the globe, that we want to do what we can to limit the oxygen depletion in those water bodies. But I don't know enough to really, I know enough to ask the question, but not enough to really understand the answer. So we can take that offline. It really isn't PFAS related, but it's just overall surface quality water.
Well, I'd like to think that we've addressed the oxygen depletion. We've mastered the BOD and the TSS, the BOD in particular, which impacts oxygen depletion. Most plants in the state are definitely meeting, or most of them are exceeding the permit effluent limits, and they're getting very low BOD numbers.
Yeah, that's good to know. But sometimes I think we have to ask the question, do we need to even make those limits stricter? But yeah,
Okay.
it's for another day.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Excuse me, Tracy. Rich Lascelles again. Could you list the tertiary plants in New Hampshire for me?
I can't off the top of my head. Obviously, Portsmouth Pierce Island is one. That's how they're just few. They're very few, but I can generate a list.
I think
Also, the secondary and the lagoon plants also.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm taking notes today for the commission. So Tracy, if you could send me your presentation and list of those plants, I can include them in our minutes. Thank you.
Can you also send the notes that you read to us before the slides started? Those were really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. Normally I don't. I don't. I PDF it, but I can definitely do that for you all.
Thank you. Gary.
Thank you. I have, maybe it's my lack of understanding, but it seems like in the universe of PFAS, some of this, and again, I apologize for not maybe understanding the whole process, but seems like a little bit of a shell game. Many of the systems are being improved, and the systems themselves have low PFAS as a result, and the systems look good. But in terms of the universe of PFAS, it seems like we're contributing to the universe of PFAS, but not really getting rid of the PFAS. Can you help me understand how the universe of PFAS is being lessened at the end point? The systems themselves clean whatever area it happens to be, secondary, primary, or tertiary, but the universe of PFAS is still there. What happens at that final universe of PFAS?
That's a question, Gary. I mean, PFAS is ubiquitous in the environment, and the only way is what we have been trying to source reduction, elimination. We as a society have got to stop putting PFAS into our environment. That's the only way we're going to get out of this, right? But now it's here. It's here and it's in our environment. And so how do we live with it now that it's in our environment? And how do we ensure the protection of public health in the environment, right? So the first thing is we need to make sure that people are the drinking water, right? Drinking water is extremely important. We need to make sure what people are drinking meets standards. And then everything else after that is, I mean, these poor wastewater treatment plants, they are receivers of everything that anyone puts in the collection system in their community. You know, and you may be a very good steward of the environment, but what is your neighbor doing? You know, and so the more we can educate the public and remove this as a source is the only way we're going to get out of this. Treatment plants are, you know, it's probably the most costly infrastructure that any community owns is their wastewater infrastructure. It's very costly. Portsmouth, for their Pierce Island upgrade, spent over $90 million on that plant. How do we expect that a small community is going to be able to afford $50 million to upgrade a treatment plant when they may have 1,000 users? That's why we are very much focused on source reduction and elimination, looking up and doing the sampling, looking into the collection systems, identifying sources, and having them eliminated. It's the most cost-effective thing that we can do.
Tracy, Rich Lascelles again. Are there, in that light, are there labeling requirements for PFAS in consumer products?
I am not an expert on that. I believe certain states have enacted legislation, but not all states. And then there's probably a movement at the federal level as well.
Does anybody else on the call know of any labeling requirements federally or here in New Hampshire?
There's no labeling requirements federally. New Hampshire has a limited product phase out bill that was passed, as you may remember, last year. I believe it was finalized. Nancy's nodding. Yes, losing track of time here. It has exemptions in there, and it isn't all comprehensive. And we do have one troubling piece in New Hampshire that the other states that have done product phase outs doesn't have, and that is in the 11th hour of this bill, the New Hampshire Senate amended the definition of PFAS. So that will allow things like what Saint-Gobain was using, PTFE and short chain PFAS, to be not counted as a PFAS. So Saint-Gobain, for your information, used fluoropolymers. Fluoropolymers are surely PFAS, or we wouldn't be a contamination site, right? But this amended definition in New Hampshire is going to be problematic. So I just want to put that out there for everybody who's in the legislation. We need to circle back to that. It's crucial. That being said, Maine and Minnesota are leading the nation, and what they've created is a clearinghouse that DES has a membership to, and that allows us now to get access to what's being reported from consumers. From consumer products, but where it's coming from is Minnesota and Maine, for example, have very comprehensive bans on PFAS in products. That means that whoever sells products is going to have to find out if PFAS is in there. So some of them are going to the manufacturers, they're going to their suppliers, and it's kind of interesting. And then that gets reported to this clearinghouse, and states like New Hampshire will have a wealth of information, but it's patchwork. There's no federal requirement. One of the issues about PFAS from the start that I've spoken about extensively is two words that I will say again: loopholes and exemptions. And this acronym CBI that I learned many years ago, which stands for Confidential Business Information. So federally, if anybody says, oh, that's confidential business information when it has to do with PFAS, the federal government says, okay, you don't have to tell us anything. So see the problem? We get it. How do we change it? Right, Nancy? She's going, yes.
Nancy?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add that was Karen Ebel's bill, and it passed in August of 2024. I just looking it up. The following PFAS added consumer products are prohibited from the sale: carpets or rugs, cosmetics, textile treatments, feminine hygiene products, food packaging in containers, juvenile products where the products are intended for children under 12, upholstered furniture, textured furnishings, including draperies, floor coverings, furnishing, bedding, towels, and tablecloths. But exempted from that ban are products made with at least 85% recycled content, products manufactured before the ban is imposed, and replacement parts for products manufactured before the ban is imposed. And I think it takes, let's see, starting on January 1st, 2027. So the bill has been passed. But to I know Tracy's point and Laureen's point, and I think we all have said this, the solution is to stop the source, and New Hampshire is not doing what we need yet to adequately stop the source and hold responsible those polluters who continue to expose us to the source. So that's just my thanks.
So it seems to me that a key element in stopping the source is effective laws to prohibit or require PFAS labeling on all consumer products.
One thing.
One piece of it, yeah. The other thing I want to point out is the Merrimack folks may know this and the state may know it, but other people may not. One of the things that the Merrimack wastewater facility did in the course of this investigation was to in their permitting process, require Saint-Gobain to do what's called a pre-sanitary sewer filtration system. So they put this system in at their facility before anything came into the sewer system. They were also required to test it and make sure it was working, because they were a huge contributor to the Merrimack wastewater facility. Not only does that go as effluent, higher than influent, to the Merrimack River, unfortunately, people do feel that that's a fast-moving river, thus it's okay. It's not okay, it's not okay. But they have compost made of biosolids since the 90s. They were one of the first in the States to do so. It used to go out to sport fields and lawns many years ago. Somewhere along the line, it was reclassified as food grade. Yikes. When I learned this in the beginning years of our investigation, I was horrified. That's not okay. I asked a lot of questions about this many years ago, and to think that that isn't regulated. So back to that system that they did. You'd think that that would take care of it, right? That's the big contributor to the wastewater facility that they've identified as a source. And they didn't, we know we didn't stop the source fully from contamination from this site. Many pathways, pouring down drains, emitting into rivers. And one of the things that isn't, I think your department, Tracy, is the storm drains, right? Storm drains and the pipes that run into other places. Deep is an example. There's 2 pipes there just south of Saint-Gobain near a boat ramp. And you say, well, you can see those pipes running, water is coming down. Where's that coming from? It's coming from drains north of there and the floor and the culverts at the sides of Daniel Webster Highway. I have tested that water because I could see this funky foam that was forming where the water was pouring into. That water was very high in PFAS. It still is. So we come back to the wastewater, facility and the compost. So a good 5 years after this pre-sanitary sewer system was in, I gave it a long time. I've learned to be patient over the course of this journey. And I went up and grabbed samples of compost. It's there for all residents to help themselves. I wasn't going to put it in my property, and I never have, but I sent it out to be tested. It still has way more PFAS than it should in it after we stopped this source. So the sampling, the monitoring, I appreciate that you said, Tracy, that isn't really going to fully solve the problem, right? Asking people to do the right thing sounds good, but there's a car wash in Merrimack that I use that has a big flashing sign. If you want to pay $12 extra and it doesn't even just say, waxing, it says Teflon coating right there on the wall. So by talking to them and helping them make better choices, there's no regulation requiring them to do that. So if someone says, why do I want to do that? I already have my supply chain established, they don't have it. So the regulations, are really what's missing of all of this. We look at the end source of compost and biosolids and land spreading, and, we dance around this issue. Food chain is a major contributor to PFAS, and it really is, and it's getting into our bodies and into the environment, not just from sludge, from animals that are pecking on land that's contaminated, from feed, on and on and on it goes. So there are some solutions we can take, and this, whole area of, wastewater is a huge one. My understanding is the Manchester facility is the only one that burns sludge, right? So they can incinerate, but I've also been told when Nancy, in her first term years ago, sponsored a bill for a take-back program for AFFF foam. It was, I believe it might have been the first in the nation. It was a really great bill, but it was voluntary. And what the EPA guidance under the first Trump administration, it goes way back, said as store it, it's inert until we know how to dispose of it, because it should not be incinerated. That was said under either Scott Pruitt or Andrew Wheeler, one or the other, and it was very definitive. And when I learned that the Manchester wastewater facility, that we know there are multiple sources there, sending PFAS directly in discharges to that plant is incinerating. You know, see what I mean? There's all these like disconnects. We have information, it's good information, and you know this. So it's really frustrating to me. You know, they also discharge, and then places that, you know, reduce it and ship it somewhere else. And, you know, what do they do with it? So, you know, we can't just pass the sludge. You know, we really have to regulate at the source, not just educate as to sampling where it's coming from. And we need some sort of controls on these facilities. I like the fact that you said the goal is for it all to go to a facility, right? Because at the facility, it can be professionally treated, just like water. You know, we encouraged in the Merrimack area people to work on expansions of water lines. If we connect them to a professionally managed water source, such as the Merrimack Village District is doing a superb job at cleaning that water and making sure it's as non-detect as we can get it for PFAS, now we have safer drinking water, right? So directing it to somewhere that's professionally managed is the way to go. I agree with that. But if we don't regulate, how many places are going to do what the MVD has done in the people of Merrimack? We did it on our dime because we knew, and forgive me for sounding dramatic, our lives depended on it. That's why 93% of our very frugal community voted to do this on our dime. That's unheard of in our town, right? That will go down in history. So this is a complex topic, and I'm not sure what the status is right now in the federal public commentary periods, if they're even going to require the continuing of monitoring and testing, because they've rolled back PFAS, you know, rules. They're not going to move forward with hazardous substance of PFAS, and I don't believe they're going to follow through on, you know, the wastewater facilities. So our plan is only as good as the funding we depend on for infrastructure improvements, right? So it's complex, and I hope, you know, I hope we can find solutions together in groups like this where we have, you know, state officials, legislators, and we start to look at what are we lacking in rulemaking. And regulation is a big part of this, unfortunately, because if people were just going to do the right thing, and maybe 100 years ago in New Hampshire, we were a handshake deal kind of state. I think we were. I felt that when I moved here in 1985, it felt really good that way. But New Hampshire has so many corporate interests right now, and waste and disposal are, they make a lot of money in this state. You know, they're not going to do the right thing. You know, we have to really put our heads together and have the will to regulate. That's the only way out of this mess.
Nancy, I'm sorry, Lorraine, were you finished? Sorry. Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention, Wendy reminded me, and I can't believe I forgot, her House Bill 167, to Rich's point about PFAS in commerce. Wendy just passed and the governor signed that HB 167, which bans the use and sale of all ski, board, and boat waxes containing PFAS chemicals. So, you know, it's another example of us trying to, you know, much like banning PFAS one at a time, it is whack-a-mole, and it should be a much larger, you know, we're banning things one at a time. We're trying our best, but you know, we rely on state and federal regulators to do this much more comprehensively and to stop the source. And you know, the other thing I was just thinking about was, I don't know if anybody's read, but the Conservation Law Foundation lawsuit recently, we're talking about wastewater treatment, and the water, they're the concern about the, you know, dumping into the Merrimack River. So it's, you know, it's all of these things. There's so many ways that we continue to just continuous cycle that we all know has to stop. And I think that's part of the reason for our commission. So that's it. But I wanted to remind everybody about Wendy's bill. Thank you.
Rosemary.
Yeah, and I mean, since this commission began 7 years ago, I think we've all had the consensus that the only solution to PFAS is to ban non-essential use and regulate the source of manufacturing. So anything coming in from a foreign country needs to be tested and certified, and the manufacturing within the United States is only limited to production that goes into absolutely essential products. So I think, you know, that's what our focus is. That's a message that we have to carry to our federal delegation, because of intercommerce. That's the only way we can really stop it at the source. PFAS isn't manufactured in New Hampshire. It's used as an ingredient in other manufacturing. So I just wanted to kind of set that home, because we could ban so many products, and yeah, we may put a dent in it, but we're just not going to solve the problem. And PFAS, you know, it's cumulative. It doesn't degrade. So stopping at the source is the only way we're going to be able to limit the concentration that eventually ends up in our water. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. And also, Tracy, just to put another kind of non-PFAS thing in your head, you mentioned something about some of these secondary systems. They may only have 1,000 users, but you know, we've been having a lot of discussions in the legislature about how to address the housing crisis. And in my opinion, the only way to do that is to expand municipal wastewater and municipal water, because without that, you're requiring residents to be built on a larger lot, like probably 3/4 of an acre, in order to accommodate a well and a septic system. So, I mean, I'd like to really start thinking about, maybe the legislators on this could, you know, we could talk about any necessary legislation, but we need to encourage the expansion of wastewater treatment plants, the expansion of secondary systems into tertiary systems, the expansion of existing systems so that they can handle more influent. Because if we can expand that, we can put more housing on a smaller piece of land, have some more density. And that's also a way to encourage more manufacturing to occur in New Hampshire. And they, you know, manufacturing pays a lot more business taxes than somebody working remotely who pays none. So I just kind of wanted that in the back of your head, even though it's not pertinent to this, the specific mission of this commission. Thank you.
Tracy, are you able to see the chat?
Let me see. Okay.
Wendy Thomas has some questions. I can read them, but
Is there a button I can push to get the chat?
I'm not sure what your view is, but
Yeah, I don't see where I can have a chat.
then let me read them. I'll read them all, and then you can take them, or I'll reread them one by one. Has there been any long-term health monitoring of communities near land application sites? Not sure you would be the one to know that. Who is responsible for alerting the public when PFAS contaminated sludge has been applied to land? Are there documented cases in our state of farms losing organic certification due to PFAS contaminated biosolids? I think there was one other. I think that may be it.
Right, those you may have to take one at a time.
So first one is, what methods are used to detect PFAS in sludge and how accurate are they?
So we have our annual SQC testing program that I mentioned. It's in state statute that we need to test the SQC holders once a year, and we have to submit a report to the legislature once a year. So those results are summarized in that report, and those should all be publicly available.
Next question is, has there been any long-term health monitoring of communities near land application sites?
Not that I'm aware of in New Hampshire.
Who is responsible for alerting the public when PFAS contaminated sludge has been applied to land?
I think we have, right now, we don't have a limit, right? We don't have a standard for biosolids. And that's what we're trying to do, is develop that screening standard. And that's the contract that we have for Verdantis. So we're trying to come up with that value that would be protective of human health and the environment.
And that will be subject to rulemaking after the final report next June. Is that right?
Yes, we would want to incorporate that standard into the rule set ENVWQ 800. And so, yes, we'll have to go through rulemaking to incorporate that standard.
Okay, and the last of Wendy's questions was, are there documented cases in our state of farms losing organic certification due to PFAS contaminated biosolids?
I'm not aware of any. And that may be regulated by the, who regulates farms? The agriculture people. They would do that, not us.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for questions, but I just agree wholeheartedly with the sentiment that we have to eliminate the problem at the front of the pipe. Is I learned the phrase yesterday at the Drinking Water Protection Conference. I do think, and obviously consult you legislators with your legal authorities, but for the past 100 years under the Commerce Clause, I would not have imagined that certain states could ban certain uses of FDA-approved pharmaceuticals. Obviously, that is passing muster in our country, and I would urge you to be courageous in acting with legislation to ban PFAS compounds. And we might be surprised with what the courts do now under some existing precedents. That's it. I guess the other thing that I learned is it's not just New Hampshire that's testing consumer products. A number of other states are, and that may lead to some kind of list once that's refined. And certainly that will give consumers an opportunity to modify their behavior. I think that will be effective in the marketplace as well. To Rich's point, and to my point, again, be courageous as far as labeling legislation in New Hampshire is concerned, and we may surprise ourselves. All right. Well, thank you very much, Tracy. A lot going on, and it's been really good to have you here to get an update.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay. Next, Andy Fuller, can you give us an update from DES?
Yep, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andy Fuller. I work at DES in the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau, with one of my primary roles being the project manager for the St. Gobain Performance Plastics site. I'm going to be providing the DES update that's for the commission that's typically provided by our director, Mike Wimsatt. So, starting as usual with a resource division update, there's no change from last month's commission update. They have requested to terminate their permit, but no action has been taken on that request to date. Moving on to the facility closure. In August of 2023, NHDES was notified that St. Gobain would be closing their Merrimack facility. They completed all manufacturing operations, removed all equipment from the facility in 2024. October of last year, they announced their plans to demolish the building located at 701 Daniel Webster Highway. They immediately began work associated with the demolition, including disconnection of utilities, hazardous building materials surveys, and abatement of interior-exterior surfaces. Demolition permits were obtained from the town of Merrimack, and the process was completed in a few phases, starting with the low bay portion of the building and some of the outbuildings, and then proceeding to the high bay portion. As of June 6th, the demolition of the former facility is nearly 100% complete. All materials have been removed from the property and disposed of. The remaining work to be completed, just a few minor things, including the decommission of a transformer to the south of the facility, and then decommissioning of the final stretch of sanitary sewer piping that's located within the railroad right-of-way. They have notified the town and closed out the demolition permits. The fencing and cameras are going to be remaining at the property for security. And with the former building pad, the only structure that will be remaining at the site when they're done. Saint-Gobain has been evaluating the potential of leaching of PFAS from the concrete. Our understanding is that's being completed through, it's what's referred to as, it's the EPA Leaching Environmental Assessment Framework, the LEAF methods and guidance. And then they're also conducting a simulated rainwater runoff test on that. So we have received periodic status reports throughout the process, and we've requested that Saint-Gobain provide a final demolition decommission report documenting all the efforts. On to our Waste Management Division update. Their contractors, Second Wind Water Systems and Culligan, have been completing POET installations for residents within the CD outer boundary since late 2022. There have been approximately 831 properties identified under term sheet attachments 1 through 25 to be offered point of entry treatment systems. And as of June 4th, 708 of those systems have been installed. The remaining properties are ones that have been either non-responsive, they could be a non-standard installation, or they could be one of the more recent notifications of eligibility, including like the most recent term sheet attachment. Contractors have been performing periodic maintenance on the systems to ensure effective operation, and we have requested annual summary reports for the POET system installation and associated maintenance effort. The Saint-Gobain contractor recently submitted a summary report documenting the installation effort and ongoing maintenance through March of 2025. We're going to be reviewing that report and providing comments to them as needed. So. Moving on to municipal water connections. They've been completing construction for work for water line installation and connections to existing mains within the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, Londonderry, Merrimack. The final paving of Hillcrest Road and the town roads was completed in April. Construction associated with the Hillcrest Road water main extension area of Litchfield is considered complete. Saint-Gobain's consultant has finalized the design packages for installation or for extensions and connections to existing water mains in the Merrimack area, including the Wildcat, Brenda Lane, and then service connections. And they began construction in the late summer 2024. The water main extensions, exterior service line connections, and interior water meter installations have been completed at 25 of the 26 properties in that area, and property owners are being notified that bottled water is no longer being provided. Final service connection, paving, and restoration of this area should be completed in spring and summer of 2025. They've also been working on service connections to existing mains in the towns of Bedford, Merrimack, and Londonderry. Exterior service lines and water meters have been installed at 59 of 70 properties that are included in those areas. They are continuing to work with the water utility and the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of water line extensions in the town of Londonderry. DS met with Saint-Gobain, the town of Londonderry, the water utility, and council multiple times to discuss the expanded water service in this area, and the negotiations between the town and Saint-Gobain continue. DS has been periodically receiving updated proposals from Saint-Gobain to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area following the initial agreements in April and June of 2022. This includes term sheet attachment number 25, which was received and reviewed by DES in May of 2025. The attachment included an updated list of remedies for all properties since the April 2022 proposal. DS anticipates that attachment 26, we should be receiving that in early July timeframe. With regards to Saint-Gobain and the water supply well sampling effort, they have been conducting long-term monitoring of drinking water wells under a groundwater management zone work plan to support implementation of groundwater management permit and support a groundwater management zone. In general, the work plan is going to result in approximately 6 samples being collected from all eligible properties by the end of 2026. They've been conducting drinking water monitoring under this plan since the end of January 2025, and as of this month, they've sampled approximately 769 properties that were eligible for monitoring under that plan. They've been sampling approximately probably 150 to 200 properties per month to meet the requirements of the plan, and they've been submitting bi-monthly status reports on that effort. As has been continuing, as new properties that exhibit exceedances of a drinking water standard are identified, they're issued bottled water eligibility letters, and then they're identified in monthly alternate water status reports to DES. Since the start of that sampling program, there have been approximately 77 additional properties that have been identified exceeding the ADQS for PFOA and offered bottled water by Saint-Gobain. For site investigation remedial action plan, I let the commission know before, Saint-Gobain has submitted a remedial action plan as well as a RAP addendum for the site. Both of those were determined to not meet our requirements of ENVOR 610 or 60610, and the deficiencies were detailed in a letter we sent them last October. We have met with Saint-Gobain and they've indicated they're going to submit another RAP addendum that further evaluates remedial alternatives that may reduce contamination at the site. Their consultants identified some data gaps that need to be addressed to respond to the comments that were in our letter and prepare that revised RAP addendum. They've indicated to us that they will be submitting a work plan this month for our review and approval that identifies the objectives and scope of a supplemental investigation. The final thing I was going to touch upon is that we were notified in April 2025 by a property owner developing a parcel at 702 Daniel Webster Highway. It's located across the street from the former Saint-Gobain facility. I believe we touched on this briefly last month. The property owner provided some results of soil testing conducted at the property, and that identified, as you would expect, PFAS contaminated soil, likely the result of air emissions from the former facility. Property owners generated a soil pile that cannot be reused on site due to their space limitations. Therefore, we sent a letter to Saint-Gobain at the end of April requesting a remedy for that soil. We've met with Saint-Gobain and the developer and council, and we understand that Saint-Gobain's been in further contact with the developer to address the pile. However, at this point, the final disposition of the soil pile has not been determined yet. So that wraps up my update from the Waste Management Division. So I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you. Maureen?
I was wondering well, you're waiting for their new addendum, and I think you were talking last time, it sounded like making sure that various data points are, in there. Back in 2018 was the last time we did all that offsite data points, and there were some of them, but not all of them. I don't know how DES is feeling about maybe expanding some of those data points at this point, because from a community perspective, I think it would be really helpful to know what we are left with. There are sites around town that probably could use some warnings, and if we don't look, we're not going to find it. There are some places where I've tested, and I know, Twin Bridge Park, for example, at Kids Cove, people walk there. We have conservation trails in town, Wildcat Falls, even the brook that also is close to and runs by Babusick. We do have the Bedford landfill, the Merrimack landfill, and other potential, places along that may be contributing to the brook. I don't know, but sightings of foam in those two spots, those three spots actually have been there. Twin Bridge, I did do some testing most recently this past January. So that's well after the closing of Saint-Gobain. 8 PFAS were found for a total of 346.3 parts per trillion in that one sample. Also the discharge pipe at Reed's Ferry, that's before the boat ramp. 8 PFAS found, 157 part per trillion PFAS. So those are my own samplings. And then there's a few more, but just to highlight, those two I think do illustrate. When I look at those sites, I think about, dogs in water, drinking water, kids playing, thinking foam is cool to scoop up with their hands. And, I don't know how many people catch and release in this area and how many people eat fish. PFOS is present too, so it isn't, I know that that's more likely to be in the flesh. But, the data points that we did way in the beginning of various brooks and waterways and soil up the road and across the road. The off-site test sites, I think those should be repeated, and the on-site, not just repeated in terms of sampling, but we cannot clean up our whole town for sure. I know that, but to have a sense of where we're at right now compared to 2018, and I don't know, what solutions are going to be there at this point, but at least we could officially just caution people in certain areas, because we haven't had adequate sampling off-site. A woman came forward a couple days ago, for example, about data points, and she asked me, she has a private well, it has the levels comply with the New Hampshire MCLs, not with the federal MCLs. I told her to check on the program for the well grant because I think she would qualify. Raises chicken, raises meat, hunts. She's a real self-sufficient person who can fillet most any animal very quickly and impressively. She's kind of scary. She's kind of cool, but kind of scary. So she has many health issues that, she's done a lot of healing, but she's a diehard lady. And she asked me about her chickens and her eggs, and to say, could there be a meat sample or an egg sample, because she's concerned about her own exposure at this point, and she's been vigilant about stopping her exposure. I didn't have an answer for her. So that, so there are a lot of data points around the community, off-site in addition to on-site. And I just wonder if there is any desire or plan to perhaps kind of revisit what are the crucial data sites that are important to the community. Some are important to the investigation, but some are also important to the community, so people can just make good decisions for themselves. So that's my question about that.
Yeah, Lori, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point on, revisiting some of these data points. As we discussed, I think last month too, once our lower AGQS went into place in 2019, we did an all focus was on drinking water wells and sampling there. And I think that tied in with this recent soil pile and these issues there has really kind of caused, allowed us, I think we're at the point now, fortunately, that we're getting a good handle on drinking water wells and sampling and implementing alternate water remedies so that we can revisit some of those other sample points, revisit potentially soil and things like that, and other stuff. As far as, plants and eggs and meats and stuff, I think that's hard without us having really like a regulatory method for those. But I do think that it's time for us to, and I think we do have intentions of revisiting some of those points and kind of expanding our investigation of the site now that we can.
Good. I think at some point when you're ready, you have a lot to do. It's a lot going on lately to figure out what you have to do. Maybe we can do some sort of a, community meeting or something just to hear what you're thinking, and maybe a roundtable. A roundtable would be appropriate, where people who are, interested in this can come and hear what's being talked about and maybe give their suggestions without any commitment on your part, of course. I think it'll be good maybe to have a roundtable discussion on this topic. The community would appreciate it. Thank you.
Rosemary.
Thank you, Chris. Andy, would you mind sending me your notes for the minutes, please?
Yep, absolutely.
And also, is there a deadline for Saint-Gobain to settle with that landowner over the soil pile?
No, there isn't. We don't have so they're under a time constraint with their project because they need to get that pile dealt with. But I don't have a mechanism under EMVOR 600 that says, Saint-Gobain, you need to deal with this in 60 days or 6 months. And that doesn't exist right now. We set an initial timeline in our letter that they needed to reach out. We needed to meet with them, which was 2 weeks, and they accommodated that. I believe that they've had continuing discussions with that, and we had provided, if anyone has seen the letter, and I'll include a link in my minutes to that letter, gave them a couple options that they could implore under 600, not telling them what they could do, but what sort of mechanisms would probably work for what they want to do. And So far, we haven't had further discussions with them. We've left it with the property owner and Saint-Gobain to determine how they want to deal with that soil.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
Hi, yes. I thank you for the update. Wanted to ask about an article that was shared with this commission, the mineralogical controls on PFAS and anthropogenic anions in subsurface soils and aquifers. And Andy, are you familiar with that article that was published in, or just actually recently published online, April 2025?
I have not read that article, no.
Okay, then now, can we talk about it next time? And maybe after you've had a chance to look at it, because I think one of the things that became clear to me was recognizing that depending on the different mineralogical components, or that there could be characteristics of the soil and where it is that determine how far the short string or short chain or long chain PFAS will travel. This may be something that you're familiar with, but I think they were diving deeply into more specifics. And I guess as I'm thinking about the commitment from Saint-Gobain to use the LEAF framework and my lack of familiarity with the LEAF framework, does the LEAF framework take into account or go as deep as 2 meters when they are looking at runoff? And maybe this is part B of my question. Will Saint-Gobain be using the LEAF framework with the amendments that were introduced late last year? Apparently there were some amendments made to the LEAF framework that are specific to PFAS that were introduced. It was like late October, November that I was seeing that those were being published. And again, I don't have the specifics on that, but if you could tell me that, yes, they're using the latest and greatest, or no, they've committed to use the LEAF framework as it was defined in early 2024, that would just be helpful for this commission to understand, I think.
We have standing biweekly meetings with them. I can reach out during one of those and bring that up as a topic to see which, if I can get clarification on which, if they're using the more recent LEAF update. I'm not terribly familiar with the LEAF, the methods and guidance, but I'll definitely bring that up. I know that they made this determination to kind of move forward with this, probably in the springtime. So I would hope that, they would try to use the most up-to-date guidance when they made the decision to do it. But I can't say for certain because I did not ask that question.
It would seem like there would be an easy path to encourage them to use the latest and greatest if they made the commitment in early spring of this year. Great. Thank you.
Don?
Yeah, thanks. Andy, I was just curious at 702 Daniel Webster Highway, was that testing done voluntarily by the landowner, or was there a requirement that they test that soil?
It was done voluntarily by the landowner, and they did it. There was not another mechanism for them to need really notify DES because it's a small enough project that it doesn't trigger other permits within DES. So they were just aware of their proximity to the facility and did the testing to kind of as part of to understand their own liability.
Yeah, so I was kind of wondering how, there may be other projects, maybe not abutting the Saint-Gobain property as this one is, but a couple large projects that have considerable amount of earth to move around. One of them I know is the ongoing expansion of the Everett Turnpike, which I know portions of that is in the groundwater management zone. And I'm not sure if anybody tested the soil there. I'm not sure if they're exporting the soil or if it's just a balanced site where they're using the same soil in the same location generally. I'm also aware there's a project on bridge replacement over the Babusick Brook on Daniel Webster Highway, which I believe is going to generate a significant amount of export. And I don't know that there's anywhere for that export to go, but I'm looking back at the consent decree, and I don't think there's any mention in there about any requirement to test soil But I know there is an expectation that within the boundary of the groundwater management zone, I think it's just a recommendation, I think, on DES's part of trying to keep soil from migrating and leaving it on site as much as possible. But in some of those sites where it's not possible to do that, it seems like there should be more of a framework that's established that's kind of consistent throughout these projects, because these are going to be coming up on other projects in the future. As you know, the PFAS isn't going away for hundreds of years. So wherever that soil is brought, and there's one example would be, I wouldn't want soil to be moved from outside of, say, MVD's wellhead protection areas and brought into MVD's wellhead protection area, maybe unknowingly to whoever's doing it. But theoretically, all of the runoff, the groundwater recharge that occurs in the wellhead protection area goes to those wells that are being protected. So that's possible. There's just an additional PFAS load that's being brought in. So I guess my recommendation would be if there would be a consideration of having some kind of framework on testing the soils that are in the groundwater management zone to know if they're even above or below the soil standards. And if they are, then it brings up the question of responsibility, and I'm not sure what that means. But those are just things looking in the future that I think the consent decree didn't really contemplate fully when it was established. And, I don't know if this is another reason why, along with the fact that the strength of the PFOA used by Saint-Gobain would be an opportunity to reopen that consent decree so these things can be considered and evaluated to see if there's a way that the polluter can handle them instead of putting the burden on the people who are affected by them. So just kind of my opinion, a statement there. Thanks.
Yep, I'll touch on, as you indicated, Don, like when we get these projects, they come in through alteration of terrain, they come and then they get relayed over to Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau. Any project that triggers AOT that's within the consent decree, that goes through us. And we do try to keep, we urge people to keep a balanced site when they're doing this to the best of their abilities. And so far, they've all been able to do that and keep it on site and manage the soil in creative ways. This was really the first instance so far where that wasn't able to be possible. So we're going down this road with Saint-Gobain. But to your point too, I see this really also kind of like what I'm ultimately likely going to be developed as some sort of soil management plan for how they're going to manage this soil. And I see that really kind of being something that's utilized for other properties that might have a similar situation or a problem with the PFAS contamination from Saint-Gobain, because this isn't the first and this isn't going to be the last project. So it's something that we are paying attention to. And
on top of my head, you would think that the Saint-Gobain site, the site remediation plan would include remediating the soils on site as well as the groundwater. And now that property doesn't really have any use anymore, there's no building there, there's nothing there. And it's probably going to be a site that's, the soil's probably going to be dug up if it needs to be treated and whatnot. Kind of wondering if there's an opportunity for some of these sites to bring the contaminated soil to that spot, since if there's already going to be soil remediation activities going on, would it make sense to have that occur over there? And then if the soil is brought to a condition that meets the standards, then it can be taken away somewhere else without the concern, I guess. But I know that's kind of out there for a thought process, but kind of combining all of those soil remediation activities in one spot sort of makes sense from an upper high view level. And it's just an idea that I'm putting out there and something to consider. Thanks.
That's a potential option. Because like you said, what we really don't want to see is someone to take, from across the street, or someone with we'll call it grossly contaminated PFAS soil, because we expect those concentrations to kind of change as you move away. We don't want to see them moving it around and and resulting in impacts to an area with groundwater that was perhaps not impacted above at another time. So we don't want soil just moving around everywhere. That's not going to be good. And to your point on the consent decree and those documents, while it doesn't explicitly tell Saint-Gobain they need to address soil, I think that we feel that is something that's probably covered. They were more explicit towards like alternate water and drinking water. And I still think that, understanding soil conditions and remedying soil is something that probably comes under the site investigation and a remedial action plan, which is still covered under the consent decree and with the company. So it may not explicitly mention it, but it does not exclude it, similar, whereas it does exclude properties that are outside that boundary from being addressed. So.
Any other questions? Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, these are not my questions, but Wendy's on the phone and has texted to me. One, she said that the lone remaining property on Wildcat Falls was her house, and it has been hooked up to public water, which is certainly appreciated. Her questions are, what about the health impacts of PFAS that are attributed to PFAS released from Saint-Gobain? Is Saint-Gobain just allowed to walk away from that damage? And is anyone at the state level considering legal action to protect our residents and pay for health costs?
Well, from I'm not something, I can't really speak on, the health side of things, I guess.
More DHHS. Thank you, Andy. Thanks.
Tanya, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Briefly, I think Nancy, Representative Murphy, you had on a key topic that maybe could be for a future, and that is there any work being done where when people go in for their annual checkups, they're getting PFAS blood work actually tested, and it's being mapped as de-identified data? And I know that there's some states that are doing this, but is New Hampshire doing this statewide to see the different effects, and the concentrated areas versus the southern New Hampshire where it has blown, I'll say, this is Saint-Gobain blew south. and what's the effects of that happening in the southern part of New Hampshire and even further into other states like Massachusetts? So I just wanted to put that out there. Maybe there's something that we could do to say, look, you should, when you go for your annual checkup, you should be getting PFAS blood tests done. And is it paid for by the annual checkup?
I know several of you have the answer to some of that. So Lorraine, go ahead.
The answer is, there's a law that we have in New Hampshire. Nancy was a sponsor of that also a number of years ago, requiring New Hampshire-based insurers. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply to federal. They may do it to pay for blood testing for PFAS. And you just have to say, I live in an area where I've had environmental exposure. That's part one. Part two is there is guidance there how to interpret that between 2 and 20 parts. Total PFAS or 20 above. It's NASEM guidance, National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine. The CDC commissioned them a few years back to do this work. They did a great job. It's a good foundation, and the goal was to build upon it. The CDC, ATSDR, which is where physicians and people get their guidance from, unfortunately, updated their page about a month ago or so, and I reviewed it, and they took all the NASEM stuff down. It's not there. So the ATSDR work, it was, as we know in this area, not adequate, has been basically rolled back. The irony is that commission of the NASEM project was done under the first Trump administration. So there's some very strange things going on. And the third part of that is the health monitoring. In New Hampshire, the governor vetoed the bill for health monitoring, which just opened a pathway. All it said is, this is past Governor Sununu, all it said is if the state has determined a responsible party, not the resident, not me saying, I think you did this to me. The state has determined it would allow for a reasonable pathway. Very sensible, very generic, vetoed. The courts, unfortunately, and I don't understand how they can do this, use that to justify throwing medical monitoring out of the class action suit. Now, that's not a legal precedent. That's a governor's opinion vetoing something, not based on any science. So in New Hampshire, we are the only industry contaminated investigation that I know of in the nation where or right to medical monitoring has basically been taken away from us. I don't know what we can do about that, you know, in legislation in the future, but every other state that has a identified PFAS contributor to their community, you know, struggle has the right to that. It's not blanket, it's limited to certain things, and it's by no means fully adequate, but it's there everywhere, but in our fine state. So I think that answers all your questions. And I had a brief comment on what Dawn said. Andy, and maybe you can think of Maine. What they did is Songbird Farm, I think it was, you know, that farm was contaminated by biosolids. The farmers were to be organic farmers. They were devastated. And what they've done is the state of Maine has taken it on as a research site. And they're doing all kinds of work on destruction and growing and everything that you can imagine that they should be doing up there. I wonder if it's kind of just pie in the sky for me to be thinking if that could be broached to Saint-Gobain. You know, they own that land and, you know, probably has value because it can probably be built upon, unfortunately, which it shouldn't be, but I don't think we have the will to stop that in this state by the decision makers. Maybe Dawn's idea, maybe think of that. You know, if you think about soil and different things going to that site, what a great spot to look at some of this destruction technology work. And you could run that by Mark Sanborn, right? Because he left DES to go into that business back before he was EPA administrator to pair with the PFAS annihilator work and things like that. So there are some technologies and some things there that, you know, maybe that's a place to put those things to work, you know, to disrupt and clean up, as opposed to the traditional way, which would be circular cleanup, which the state hasn't really put them on the list. So for some reason that isn't going to happen, but maybe we can approach it in an R&D perspective. I don't know.
Nancy, did you have something to add? No, okay. Anything else for Andy? And if not, Whitney, can you give us a DHHS update, please?
Sure. Hi. Okay, so I'm, and just as a quick introduction, I'm Whitney Hammond. I'm the Deputy Director for the Division of Public Health Services, and I'm at least attending in Michelle Roberge's, you know, absence and possibly moving forward. So I have updates today on the Merrimack cancer investigation. The team held its final regularly scheduled monthly meeting of the steering committee on June 4th. The discussion at the June meeting was primarily focused on updates to the pilot study design with institutional review board modification admissions, updates to recruitment, and plans for reviewing a draft of the final report that will be submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services. The steering committee members remain available for ad hoc meetings. The study has four main components, the status of which are summarized below. So one part is the community engagement studios and online feedback form. The engagement studios are complete, but we continue to have a form that remains live on the web with a link. And I think I'll send these updates out after, so the link will be available in those notes. The team regularly reviews comments and questions submitted by community members using that online form. And those submissions include ideas or suggestions related to the feasibility study. The second component of the study is the cancer registry data analysis. That team is led by Dr. Salas, and they finalized their analysis with feedback from the steering committee and then also the scientific advisory board. And the findings from that will be included in the final report that's going to be submitted to the department this month. Then there was the UNH feasibility survey, and the Dartmouth team has received the final draft report from the UNH Survey Center, and that the results of that survey will also be included in the final report that we received this month. And then the fourth component is the actual pilot study. The Dartmouth team continues to work on the pilot study, and the pilot study will be the primary activity for the remainder of the contract. In alignment with the goals of the overall phase 3 feasibility study, the purpose of the pilot study is primarily to assess the feasibility of doing some sort of a larger study. And so the focus is to generate a hypothesis that could be tested in some sort of larger next study. Advertising and recruitment for the pilot study is ongoing. The recruitment flyer has been approved by the IRB and is being used and shared out. Individuals from the Granite State panel that provided their contact information to be updated about future research opportunities have now been sent an email with study information. Amy Rousseau of DES has sent out the flyer to the PFAS list that she has. The flyer has been posted in oncology clinics and circulated through the physician network. And then there's been advertisements scheduled to appear in 2 different newspapers. So advertisements will be appearing in the Hippo and then also the Union Leader, both of those throughout the month of June to try and recruit. And then additional flyers are being posted in the town halls. So they have been posted actually because that was on June 9th. So in 9 town halls, libraries, and other public spaces with bulletin boards. The current response to the recruitment efforts has been, and I don't know if you guys have gotten updates along the way on this, we got almost 3,000 responses to the eligibility questionnaire. And unfortunately, I guess this was done online. And so there's been a lot of bot activity. And so Dartmouth has been having to work through figuring out what are real responses versus not. And based on that process, they've got at least 40 people who are not bots who are interested and eligible for the study. Let's see, the Dartmouth team is focusing on reaching and enrolling those real individuals, not the bots, for the pilot study. And that, so that's been a big part of their focus most recently. And then they have amended their IRB approved study protocol to add in blood and toenail samples. So they submitted that on May 30th. And what they're proposing to do is that responders to the questionnaire who confirm interest in providing samples will be considered to provide a finger pricked blood sample and or toenail clippings. Participants who have confirmed interest in additional study activities will be contacted with an initial email that contains information providing the 2 different samples. One is an at-home self-collection and one, and the other, they're both home self-collection, the finger prick as well as the toenails. So participants will complete the home self-collection of samples. Blood samples will be stored and shipped to Eurofins for testing, and results from the blood test will be returned to participants unless they opt out of receiving the results, and then toenail samples will be stored and saved for metal testing later on. So that's the update I have on the Merrimack study, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Whitney? Okay, if not, thank you, Whitney. For a legislative update, as we have heard, the HB 167 is passed and has been signed into law. And I think the effective date is January 1 of 2026, maybe. But at any rate, that is passed, thankfully. And the other bill to extend the statute of limitations, I think, is killed probably for good this biennium. So that is what I know about for legislation. Since we have a quorum, I do want to take up the minutes now, and I will note in the record abstentions from anyone who is here today but was not present at the last meeting, so we don't have to do that. And if there are no objections or corrections to the minutes, we'll just take that as a unanimous. But if there are objections or corrections, please speak up now or raise your hand. Okay, we will take that as unanimous with the abstentions of members who are not present. And just as a reminder, next month we'll have a meeting, and then it'll be our August break. And then it's really time in earnest to prepare the annual report. And so if people have topics, please let me know offline, or let me know at our next meeting what areas of interest that you have, so we can address those in the annual report. Our next meeting is July 11th at 2 p.m. Friday. And unless anyone else has new business or other things to discuss, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Rosemary, seconded by Gary. All those in favor, please signify. Thank you. Any opposed? All right, that passes. Happy Father's Day, fathers and grandfathers, and have a good weekend. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. Bye.
Thanks, Chris. Bye, everyone.